that night, you guys were amongst the first responder, I don't know, you've been called heroes, you've been called saints, you've been called angels, and you guys showed up to work to do your job, just like any other night. What was it like in that moment?
Yeah, I think I think one of the big unique things of that night is typically in our world when we train, one of the first things that we just preach and constantly dwell into our crew's head is scene safety. We don't enter unsafe scenes. That's not our job. That is not our role. That's what law enforcement is for. And it's not until law enforcement gives the all clear, or some level of it being clear, that then we begin to move crews in and go to work. What was unique that night was we had been contracted to provide medical services for the festival, and we had a duty, an obligation, a want to begin responding from within, and that's what we did. The countless stories of just our personnel that were assigned to the event, those that work for us that that night they were there to enjoy the concert, and like anybody, they had the opportunity to get out of there, and they chose to stay behind. I don't know how you put into words what that makes you feel like as somebody who was tasked with leading this group, and two, how you just put that into words that you have the opportunity to be surrounded and work with people that are so focused on helping others. Like any large-scale event that we do, we have crews that are strategically placed throughout the venue. We're at the point now in the event where the main act is on the stage, so naturally that's where the crowd is. The crowd is focused on that main stage. Any other activation has been shut down, and so crews are strategically placed. One end of the venue, we have a large medical tent that's seeing patients, for various things, whether that's blisters, cuts, I had a little too much to drink tonight, whatever that may be, and so business as usual. Me in particular, I was helping some guests of the concert into a cab, and so at the moment just before we heard the first volley, I was putting two guests into a taxi cab that then would head northbound on the strip. For me at that moment, it was me turning around. At that point, I was about ready to call it a day myself. It had been a long weekend. The crews were in place. The crews were doing what they needed to do. There was not necessarily a need for me to be there. And my vehicle was parked more or less behind the venue, but walking south. And so as I turned around and began that walk, that's when we heard what was the first volley. Not realizing that's what it was and trying to figure out exactly what was going on. I'm surrounded by other Metro officers, and everyone's kind of looking up, looking down, looking right, looking left, trying to figure out what's going on. And that's when law enforcement began to take cover behind a wall that separates the street from the sidewalk on Las Vegas Boulevard. Naturally, I followed suit and took cover behind that wall. And that's when you quickly realize that this wasn't crackling power lines. This wasn't some sort of drive-by. This wasn't any scenario you could fathom. This was shots were being fired in our direction. And for me, again, going back to, we teach scene safety, we also teach crew safety. If we're not safe, or if we get injured, then we're no help to those that need our help. But on the flip side, there was, for me, 16 of my coworkers that were inside. 16 people that I played a part in assigning to this event that I felt I have a responsibility for. When we go and work these events, we do briefings and we don't talk about, let's all make sure that we get home safe tonight. It's not a normal part of briefing, but there's that underlying responsibility that you have as a leader to make sure that we leave the same way that we arrived. And in those moments, that became a very real reality that this is bad, something's happening, there's going to be a lot of people coming our way really fast, and this is what I don't want to say this is what we train for, but this is what we talk about. This is it. This is the big one. And so for me, it never crossed my mind that I needed to get out of there. what crossed my mind was I need to find my people. I need to, we need to group together, we need to come up with a plan, and we need to get out there and go to work. Little did I know, our teams were already going to work. They were grabbing people, they were pulling people underneath the stage, they were beginning that evacuation moment. I can only imagine what was going through their mind. You know, through my mind, everything from, are my coworkers safe? I probably should try to call my family real quick. I should, right? Just a laundry list of what's going on, what's happening right now. All the while not knowing where the bullets are coming from, but just constantly hearing bullets. You know, from hearing bullets to the next thing you do is you can smell burning flesh from people that had, you know, either been grazed by a bullet or been shot by a bullet. You begin journeying through the venue trying to get to, you know, for me, my end point was our medical tent, and you look right, you look left, and there's people that are dead. There's an urgency in the crowd of people that don't want to leave. They want to help. They wanted to do whatever they could to be an extension of us. There were, throughout the night, in those immediate moments, there were patients being brought to us. There were bystanders that clearly had some knowledge of medicine, asking, you know, we need to start CPR on this girl. We need to start CPR on this kid. And that, you know, some of those are images that'll never leave my mind. Even just talking about it right now, I can picture 2 of the 58 that lost their lives that night, that died there. And having to look somebody in the face, asking you to do CPR on somebody, and point blank saying, no, we're not going to do that tonight. You know, it's easy to say that we talk about that in a training session, and how we're going to manage a mass casualty incident, and what our triage and what our treatment's going to look like that night. And it's easy to take a test and answer those questions, but then to be faced with, in part, what is a no-brainer, right? Can you do CPR on this person? Well, it's what seemed to be such a simple question to have to tell somebody no. It was the right decision, but it's certainly, you know, something that still, in this moment, just, I think, bothers me to some extent. You know, sights and sounds that I had never experienced in my career were experienced in those moments. I've run calls where people have been shot. I've run calls where multiple people have been shot. But to have pure chaos, a patient walk up to me who had taken a bullet to the top of her skull, having a vivid conversation with me, trying to figure out why the top of her head is burning, and just how quick those moments were, but at the same time how fast all this was happening. I mean, it's hard to describe how you. I don't know if there's a way you sum up everything that you saw that night, or everything that you experienced, or everything that you felt in that moment, and beyond those immediate minutes of gunfire. Just amongst all the chaos that was happening that night, to see people that took objects that were never meant to be backboards, devices that were never meant to move people, to see people just go to work and to bring patients to us. That, to me, those are the heroes. I was assigned to be there that night. I didn't pay to go there. These people paid to go there. These fans paid to be there. They paid for an experience, and they had, like many, they had the opportunity to evacuate and get out of there, get out of harm's way, and they didn't. And some didn't until you more or less had to force them to leave. That's heroism. I think there was a bond that's you know, that's been created really amongst our community when it comes to the EMS community. I think there's, you know, moments where the people that were there that night and the people that responded that night, there's a moment where the first ambulance showed up, and it had been what felt like an eternity for ambulances to show up. And in our world, when resources aren't showing up, it's because the scene's not safe. And so hearing those sirens in the distance, thinking to yourself, these resources are going to be held back. And then all of a sudden, that resource shows up, that ambulance shows up. And there is no hesitation from that crew that they look you in the eyes, you make eye contact, and you immediately know that we're working, we're going to work, we got to get this done. And to hear words from fellow colleagues saying, put as many as you can back here. Is that something that would happen on a day-to-day basis? Yeah, I think so. Typically when you call 911 and an ambulance responds, there may be one patient, there may be two patients. Any more than that, more ambulances come and take those one or two patients. But to take as many critical patients that this particular crew took that night, that for me was a defining moment of that night. I think that night for me overall, and the days that followed, as a kid, I always had a passion for medicine. I always wanted to do something medicine related. I had dreams of being a doctor, of whatever that looked like. But I always thought it'd be cool to be in an ambulance. How cool would it be to drive up and down the strip with lights and sirens on? Like, how cool would that be? And so straight out of high school, I was given that opportunity. And over the years, what I saw myself doing in medicine shifted. Whether that was to go to medical school, those thoughts shifted, those thoughts changed. I second guessed it, I reconsidered it. But one thing that never changed, and one thing that for me was solidified that night, was that I have been placed where I'm at to help people. And that night solidified that. Whatever I do in my life, I want to help people. And whether that's through medicine, whether that's through, you name it, I want to be there for people when it's their moment, when they're at what they believe is the lowest of low in their time of need. I want to be that person. And for me, it's given me a drive to explore how do we better serve our community? How do I better serve my community? That moment solidified that. And I'm constantly reminded of that every time I see a sticker that says Vegas Strong. And unfortunately, I think things happen in our society that various hashtags are created, various phrases are created. And growing up here in Southern Nevada, there's a lot of people don't realize that there's community outside of the glitz, the glamour, the entertainment, the amazing stuff that our city does. But there is such a community here. It's a community that I've been fortunate to grow up in. It's a community that I've attended college in. It's a community that I've been given the opportunity to be able to give back. And that Vegas Strong, just for me, as cliche as it sounds, has such a significant meaning. And for me, it's an even more significant meaning that I have an opportunity to work at a company called Community, to be able to serve my community.
In the days and weeks that followed, how did you guys take care of yourselves?
Yeah, believe it or not, you'll meet a lot of type A personalities in this business. People that don't want help. People that are more worried about everyone else besides themselves. And one of the things that makes me proud to be able to work for this organization was that from the moment that this occurred to that morning following the hours long that we were on that scene, we brought in counselors, we brought in therapists, and I can tell you that, it's EMS doesn't have it figured out. First responders don't have it figured out. But I can tell you that this company did everything it could to ensure that the mental health and the well-being of all of our employees was taken care of. I think it's something we still struggle with today. It's Unfortunately, we still continue to lose people to mental health issues in our industry. And we know it takes a toll on our personnel. For me personally, it took a while. It took a while to crack the shell, for me to open up, and to be able to share, and to be able to figure out why I was having the thoughts I was having, or having the visions that I was having. But yeah, it's a focus of ours. It's something that we deeply care about here in our organization, and we constantly try to find ways, and whether they be subtle, whether they be more direct, to really focus in on the mental health and the mental well-being of not only our leaders, but of our men and women that every day don't know what they're going to respond to, don't know what they're going to experience, and truth be told, don't know if they're going to make it home that night.
In the 5 years since, what has changed for the better?
I think there's 5 years later, I think there's a handful of things that have changed. I think from an industry standpoint, there's a little bit, I think there's more emphasis to have the uncomfortable conversations. Being the entertainment capital of the world, we attract a lot. We attract big events. And when we gather in a room with ourselves, with stakeholders and community partners, you're now in a room where we can have those difficult conversations. Nobody wants to talk about what happens if there's a bomb, what happens if there's this device, what happens if somebody decides to do something bad. And some of them are, I think, easier to talk about as opposed to others. I think there's this underlying, I know, in our world, in that first responder world, there's lots of conversation about what's going to happen next. Not if it's going to happen, but when is it going to happen? And so I think there's a more emphasis from the industry, from what we're doing, to ensure the safety of all those that live here, visit here, and go to these events. Because at the end of the day, evil's not going to prevail. 5 years later, evil has not prevailed. There's been some challenging things that have happened in our communities, some bad things that have happened in our community, but I think 5 years later, we're still this tight-knit community. We're still here to look out for one another. We're still Vegas strong. Personally, what's changed? Up until a week ago, it's still trying to wrap my head around that it's been 5 years. It's difficult. It's lots of reflection. That night, unfortunately, I lost a friend who was amongst one of the 58 that passed, and those thoughts come back. This year was the first year that I went back through text messages that I had from 5 years ago. Everything from people that were checking in on me, to the texts that I sent to my family, to the text that I sent to somebody that died. And that was the first time in the 5 years. I'm sure I looked at them, post the event, but probably the first time that kind of stirred these emotions that, in those, I think we have a tendency to compartmentalize where we put feelings, and where our emotions are stored. And for me, 5 years later, it's opened up some of those. But for me, it reminds me of the community that I'm a part of. It reminds me of the opportunity I have to be able to do what I do, to be able to sit down and be able to share my story, to be able to share the story of the hundreds and thousands of people in our community that helped that night. For those that are complete strangers to our community, that every year they come back and they're a part of this unique community that's been created after such a horrific event. I mean, our community stood up for the minutes and the hours and the days and the weeks and the years since that event. There was a different, and it still is. There was almost a turn, for somebody, walking into a Starbucks in uniform, somebody holding the door open for you and just saying thank you. It's easy for me to thank people, but when people were thanking me, it was, maybe to this day, it's hard. And I don't stand behind the, well, it's what you're paid to do. It's what you signed up for. Nobody that wears our uniform signed up for that night. Nobody that wears our uniform signs up to get shot at. Nobody signs up for this career to deal with demons and have nightmares. Is it a part of the job? It's become part of the job. But the community just really showed up that night. And I think it's just important that we have these difficult conversations. Stop the bleed training, where we teach people how to put tourniquets on and how you can truly save somebody's life. Those are tools that came out of bad experiences. We learn a lot of this stuff because of war. And that's a tool that, we used in EMS, and it was a tool that night was an important tool. And, a very vivid thought that night was seeing folks that would take blankets, that would take stethoscopes, that were taking seat belts and turning them into tourniquets because it's such an important tool. And I truly believe that we're all placed where we are for a reason. We have bad things that happen in life. We have a few bad sour apples in our society, but we're a community that is here to look out for one another and support one another, and anything we can do to make ourselves better, in turn, makes our community that much stronger.